If you woke up one morning, opened your Windows 11 laptop, and noticed your system had quietly updated itself overnight, you probably didn't think much of it. Maybe you waited the usual 30 seconds for everything to load back up, dismissed the little restart notification, and got on with your day. That's exactly what Microsoft is counting on, because buried inside that update, underneath the surface-level performance improvements and security patches that the official changelog highlights in big, friendly letters, were a handful of new telemetry and data collection settings that quietly switched themselves on without asking your permission. No pop-up, no warning, no opt-in screen. Just a silent toggle flipped in the background while you were asleep, sending more of your personal data to Microsoft's servers, starting the moment your machine booted back up. And the frustrating part isn't even that these settings exist. It's that most people will never know they're on, because finding them requires digging through menus that Microsoft has deliberately made confusing, scattered across multiple different sections of the Settings app, buried under labels that sound harmless or even beneficial. This article is going to walk you through exactly what changed, what each of these settings actually does in plain language, where to find them on your machine right now, and why turning them off is something you should do today rather than later. Before we get into the specific settings, it's worth taking a moment to understand what telemetry actually means in the context of Windows 11. Telemetry, in plain terms, is data that your computer sends back to Microsoft about how you use it. The problem with how Microsoft handles it is threefold. First, the amount of data collected goes far beyond what's needed to diagnose technical issues. We're talking about which apps you open and how often, what you search for in the start menu, which websites you visit through Edge, what you type, what you say near your microphone when certain features are enabled, and the general pattern of your daily computing behavior mapped in granular, time-stamped detail. Second, there is no true opt-out. Even the lowest available setting still allows a significant baseline of data collection. Third, every major Windows update has a documented pattern of resetting or adding to these settings without notifying users in any meaningful way. You configure your privacy settings during setup, feel reasonably satisfied, and then months later an update quietly rolls back your choices or adds entirely new data collection categories that didn't exist before. That pattern has repeated itself consistently across multiple update cycles, and the latest round is no different. The first setting you need to find and turn off is diagnostic data collection, specifically the option that allows Microsoft to collect what they classify as optional diagnostic data. You'll find this under Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Diagnostics and Feedback. When you open this section, you'll see a toggle for sending optional diagnostic data to Microsoft. If your system is recently updated, there's a meaningful chance this toggle has been switched back on, even if you turned it off before. Optional diagnostic data includes information about the websites you browse, the apps you use and how you use them, the features within those apps you interact with, and additional details about your device and its settings. Turn it off, and then continue down the same page to find a second option called Improve Inking and Typing. This one sends samples of what you type and what you write with a stylus to Microsoft, ostensibly to improve handwriting and autocorrect features. If you use your keyboard or a pen input on a Surface device, this setting is collecting samples of your actual typed content. Turn it off as well while you're in this section. The second setting is tied to something Microsoft introduced with considerable fanfare called Recall, and while the initial rollout faced enormous public backlash that forced Microsoft to delay and restructure the feature, elements of its underlying infrastructure have continued to be deployed through updates in ways that aren't always clearly communicated. Recall is an AI-powered feature that takes periodic screenshots of everything on your screen throughout your working day, and then uses those screenshots to build a searchable timeline of your computer activity. Everything visible on your screen at any point, including private messages, financial documents, medical information, passwords that briefly appeared on screen, personal photos, and confidential work documents, gets captured and stored on your device and potentially processed by Microsoft's AI systems. After the backlash, Microsoft made Recall opt-in rather than opt-in by default. But subsequent updates have introduced related features and data pathways under different names that warrant a check. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Search Permissions, and look for options related to Cloud Content Search and Search History. Also navigate to Settings, then System, then Recall if the option appears on your device, and confirm it is not enabled. On Copilot Plus PCs specifically, which are the machines Microsoft has designated as AI-capable hardware, these settings deserve extra scrutiny because the entire device category was designed with these data collection features as a core selling point. The third setting is the advertising ID. Every Windows 11 installation is assigned a unique advertising identifier that gets shared with apps on your device and with Microsoft's own services, allowing them to build a profile of your interests based on your behavior and then serve you targeted advertising. When you install apps from the Microsoft Store, those apps can access your advertising ID and use it to track your behavior across multiple apps and sessions. The recent update added new categories of interest inference to the system, meaning Microsoft's advertising platform is now drawing on a broader range of signals from your Windows behavior to classify you into advertising segments. Find this under Settings, then Privacy and Security, then General. The very first toggle on that page will read, "Let apps show me personalized ads by using my advertising ID." Turn it off. While you're on that same General page, also turn off, "Let websites show me locally relevant content by accessing my language list." Let Windows improve start and search results by tracking app launches, and show me suggested content in the Settings app. Each of these is a separate data collection and behavioral tracking mechanism that got quietly re-enabled or expanded in the recent update, and all of them can be disabled from this single page. The fourth setting concerns location data, and this one catches people off guard because they assume location tracking is obviously turned off on a laptop or desktop sitting on their desk. But Windows 11 has a robust location system that works through WoW. Fee triangulation, IP geolocation, and in some cases GPS hardware on portable devices. And recent updates have expanded the number of Microsoft services and partner apps that request and are granted access to this location data by default. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Location. At the top of this page, you'll find the master location toggle for the device, and below it, you'll find a per app breakdown showing which apps currently have access to your location. In many cases, apps that have no obvious need for location access will be listed as having it enabled, because the default behavior when an app requests location permission during installation is to grant it without asking. Also look specifically for a setting called Windows Location History, which stores a log of location data that has been shared with apps over a recent period, and clear that log while you're there. If you don't use any features that genuinely require location access on your Windows machine, disabling the master toggle is the cleanest solution. The fifth setting is the one that has generated the most concern among privacy researchers following the latest update cycle, and it's also the one Microsoft has been the least transparent about in its official communications. This is the set of options governing what Microsoft calls connected experiences and cloud-based processing within Microsoft 365 and the built-in Windows apps. If you use Microsoft Word, Excel, Outlook, Teams, or any other application in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, those apps have settings that control whether your document content, your email content, and your communication data get sent to Microsoft's cloud servers for processing. The official justification is that cloud processing enables AI-powered features like grammar suggestions, translation, meeting transcription, and intelligent search. But the trade-off is that the content of your documents and communications is being transmitted to and processed by Microsoft's infrastructure, subject to Microsoft's data retention policies, and may be used to train Microsoft's AI models depending on your license agreement. After the latest update, several of these connected experience settings that previously defaulted to off were flipped to on. To find and manage these, open any Microsoft 365 app, such as Word, go to File, then Options, then Trust Center Settings, and look for the Privacy Settings option. Within that menu, you'll find toggles for optional connected experiences, which you should review carefully and disable any categories you're not actively using. Having walked through all 5 of these settings, it's worth stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, because the issue here isn't really any single toggle or any single update. The pattern itself is the problem. Microsoft has a documented multi-year history of treating each major Windows update as an opportunity to reset user privacy preferences, add new data collection categories, and move previously optional features into default on positions. Users who care about privacy are essentially engaged in an ongoing game of catch-up, where every few months they need to re-examine their settings, redisable things that were quietly re-enabled, and learn about new data collection mechanisms that were added without prominent disclosure. This is not an accident or an oversight. It is a deliberate design philosophy that reflects the reality that Windows is no longer primarily a product Microsoft sells for a one-time fee. It is a platform through which Microsoft monetizes user attention and user data on an ongoing basis. And every user preference setting that gets turned off represents a reduction in the data flow that underlies that business model. For users who have been watching this pattern play out over the past several years, it's also worth understanding why this is one of the things that consistently pushes people toward Linux. The Linux model of privacy is structurally different. Because Linux is open source, every line of code that runs on your system is publicly readable and auditable by anyone in the world. There is no hidden telemetry that the community doesn't know about, because any attempt to add it would be immediately visible in the source code and would trigger exactly the kind of community scrutiny that makes such a move politically impossible for major Linux distributions. When you install Ubuntu, Fedora, or Linux Mint, the software you're running is not sending behavioral telemetry to a corporation that monetizes it through advertising partnership ES. Some distributions include optional, anonymized diagnostic reporting, but these are explicitly disclosed, clearly opt-in, and contain nothing resembling the granular behavioral profiling that Windows 11's telemetry system captures. At the operating system level, Linux gives you a degree of baseline privacy assurance that Windows 11 simply cannot match, because the business model underlying Linux distributions doesn't depend on harvesting and monetizing user data. There is one more thing worth addressing, because it comes up every time this conversation happens, and that's the argument that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear from telemetry. This framing fundamentally misunderstands what privacy is and why it matters. Privacy isn't about hiding wrongdoing. It's about maintaining control over your own information and your own narrative. Every person reading this article makes countless small decisions throughout a day that they wouldn't necessarily want documented, analyzed, and stored indefinitely by a corporation whose financial interests are not aligned with theirs. The websites you browse when you're researching a medical symptom. The documents you draft and then delete because you changed your mind. The searches you run when you're trying to understand something you're uncertain about. None of this is wrongdoing, and none of it is something most people would want continuously monitored, cataloged, and fed into a behavioral profile they never consented to. The nothing to hide argument also ignores the very real problem of data breaches, which affect even the largest technology companies regularly. Data that Microsoft collects and stores is data that can be exposed if Microsoft's systems are compromised, which is a risk that exists independently of how much you trust Microsoft's intentions under normal circumstances. Every piece of behavioral data that doesn't get collected in the first place is data that can never be leaked, sold, subpoenaed, or misused, which is the strongest possible argument for minimizing collection at the source. The data that gets collected through these settings doesn't disappear once it reaches Microsoft's servers. It persists, it gets analyzed, it feeds into advertising profiles and AI training datasets, and it exists in a form that is accessible to Microsoft and subject to the legal frameworks of the jurisdictions where Microsoft operates. And this is worth thinking about carefully, because the legal frameworks governing what governments can request from technology companies and what those companies are required to hand over have shifted significantly over the past decade. In several countries, technology companies operating under local law are required to provide user data to government agencies upon request, without necessarily notifying the affected user that their data has been accessed. The data Microsoft collects about your Windows usage exists within that legal framework, which means it isn't purely a question of what Microsoft itself chooses to do with your information. It's also a question of what entities Microsoft can be compelled to share it with under circumstances that are entirely outside your control. For individuals living under governments with strong rule of law and robust civil liberties protections, this risk may feel abstract. For journalists, activists, researchers, lawyers, healthcare workers, and anyone else whose work involves handling sensitive information about other people, it is considerably more concrete. And for users in countries where the relationship between technology companies and government surveillance is more fraught, it is an immediate and practical concern that shapes which operating systems they can safely use for sensitive work at all. It is also worth noting that all of what has been described in this article is fully legal and covered by the terms of service you agreed to when you installed Windows 11 or allowed it to update, which is precisely the point. Microsoft is not secretly doing something it's hiding from regulators. It is doing something it has disclosed in documentation that runs to dozens of pages of dense legal language that almost nobody reads before clicking, "I agree." The gap between what Microsoft discloses in fine print and what it prominently communicates to users during setup or after an update is where most of the real privacy harm lives. Turning off these 5 settings today is a meaningful step toward reclaiming your machine's behavior. Building a habit of reviewing your privacy settings after every major update is the sustainable version of that same step. And if the cumulative weight of these repeated update cycles feels like more than you want to keep managing indefinitely, understanding that there are stable, mature, user-friendly alternatives to Windows 11 is a worthwhile thing to carry with you as you think about where you want your computing life to go from here.